Walking in a military cantonment, I used to gaze at the gate of officers' mess and the boundary walls of military area out of bounds for civilians. In my imagination, beyond these gates and walls lay a fascinating world, and I would tell myself, one day I'm going to live inside these. But dreams require efforts to come true. So for 6 months, I prepared hard for my military examination. The D-Day arrived and I appeared in front of the service selection board and was recommended to be an officer in Indian Army. Now, I was pretty sure that my next step was going to be in the Officers Training Academy. My hopes were on an all-time high. But in the story of life, sometimes the climax dashes our hopes and turns them into despair. When the final result came, my name was not there in the merit list. I still remember how it felt. It felt like electrocution. It felt as if the entire world had collapsed over my head. It came as a shock. How could I not make it after being so close? On top of that, one of my teachers sarcastically remarked, "Oh, you have not been selected. What are you going to do now?" And there I stood at the age of 19, seriously thinking, what am I going to do now? But if something is very close to our heart, do we leave it so easily? Is one rejection enough to halt our steps into its direction? Is one setback enough to hold us back? No. It is in these times of failure when the hope comes into picture. It is in these times when our mettle is put to real test. Hope that one day these present situations in which I'm feeling stuck are going to change for better. Hope that one day me and God are going to find a way together out of it. So here I applied again for Indian Army as well as Indian Air Force next year. The Air Force examination happened first and I indeed was selected to be now an officer in the Indian Air Force. The prospect seemed greener and brighter again. But through my experiences in life, I have realized that life is a one continuous circle of lows and highs for everybody. It is up to us as to where we decide to stop. That is the only thing that matters. That is the only thing which decides the final outcome of our life. It is an entire circle of hope, despair, and hope. A few years later, I ventured into mountaineering. It so happened that Indian Air Force, of which now I was also a part, decided to send its women officers to Mount Everest expedition. I volunteered for it, and it was supposed to be a training for 2 years on different Himalayan peaks before we actually embarked onto Mount Everest. So as a team, we worked hard on sports field as well as on mountains. The entire atmosphere was charged. In a formal ceremony, we were handed over the national flag along with the Indian Air Force flag in a hope that we would unfurl it on top of Mount Everest. Our friends, our family, the entire nation looked up to us. We on our part faced the life-threatening challenges of Mount Everest valiantly and completed our acclimatization procedure. Now I looked at the mountain top with a lot of expectations. The glimmer of hope burnt bright within me. However, as we climbed up to 21,500 feet, out of 6 of us, 3 fell victim to fatigue and exhaustion. I was one of them. While 3 of us continued up, we stayed back at that altitude. The plan was to recover and continue up again with the second summit group, which was to arrive a few days later. But we had forgotten that at that altitude, nobody recovers so easily. The cold got me. First it got my throat and I lost my voice due to infection. It pained so heavily that it felt as if somebody had slit it and left it open there. However, when the second group arrived, I started climbing with them without realizing that the cold had indeed seeped deep within me. Just Within 2 hours of climb, I started feeling cold in my fingers and later in my chest. All attempts to warm them failed, and ultimately, I had to decide to retreat from there. I still remember, back in base camp, crying alone in a tent to the accompaniment of Mirza Ghalib's poem, Hazaron khwahishein aisi ki har khwahish pe dam nikle. There are thousands of desires within me, and for each one of them, I am willing to die. Oh God, oh Lord, you have granted me many of them, but still there are several yet unfulfilled deep within me. Some of my teammates were able to successfully climb to the top, and thus the Indian Air Force expedition returned victorious to jubilations and celebrations. Happy for my team, I was sad for myself, because failures all over the world return home to disgrace. While comments writing me off, while sarcasm and criticism flew at me from all directions, my fighting spirit kicked in. In an intimate conversation with Mount Everest, I told it, I will come back. But this was not going to be so easy. There were hundreds of questions to be answered before that. The Air Force expedition was already over, and there was no possibility of holding another expedition to Everest in near future. So now that meant that I will have to launch my own individual expedition. Before that, I will have to check out if there is a policy regarding this kind of an expedition, because generally it does not happen so in forces. Being a Defense Forces officer, will I be permitted to seek finances from outside? The bigger question was whether the private enterprises be willing to stake their money on me. From where are these exorbitant finances going to come? When I approached a very prestigious adventure foundation in India, I was told unofficially that being a defense officer, since there was a restriction on me talking to press, there would be no possibility of getting publicity in return as a return on their investment, and that is why they will not be willing to sponsor me. As I stood outside their office in that blistering heat under the scorching sun, I still remember gazing at the huge sports complex of that foundation. I felt only despair, just dark, dense despair all around me. My head swirled at that time. But as human beings, we may feel down for a while. However, it is up to us whether we would let this darkness win, or we would search for even a slightest glimmer of hope and light somewhere. Lighting even a small matchstick is enough to dispel the darkness, because when you take that first bold step, perhaps somewhere you will also find a candle. If you continue walking, perhaps you will find another candles on your way until all of them lit together fill your room with light and nothing else. This is the way of God for those who refuse to surrender to despair and darkness. And therefore, me and my family decided to shell out all our savings to meet the finances. I also worked out early in the morning or late in night to cater to my dual responsibilities of discharging my Air Force duties as well as maintaining my physical fitness to the utmost level. And after a year, I was indeed back on Mount Everest. This 2 months expedition was very eventful again, because on the same point on the Lhotse wall, I fell sick again. It was the same point which had defeated me last year. It was the same point from where I had retreated the previous year. One night went by when I sat holding my chest in severe ache, wondering if this is the end. But no, this is the time when a battle between hope and despair ensues. This was a fierce battle, and miraculously, the hope won. In the morning, my vital parameters came fine, and I did launch my summit attempt a few days later. However, when I was climbing, on the last leg towards summit, now there was only a one night difference between me and the top and this ultimate dream. What happens is that I started feeling cold in my foot. Imagine the conditions. We were climbing in death zone above 26,000 feet, and there was an entire dark cold night in front of us to be climbed through. Now there was a question, to continue or to retreat. If I continue, I have the danger of losing my foot to frostbite. If I return, I am certainly going to lose my self-respect in my own eyes. And therefore, after taking whatever precautions were possible, I decided to continue. I continued climbing throughout the night while my foot ached. But on the morning of 26th May 2012, as the sun cast its rays on the horizon, I was able to stand on top of Mount Everest. It was a victory of human will. When I came down, my toes were indeed frostbitten. I was hospitalized for 3 months. The doctors opined that 2 of them were going to be amputated, and I was advised to stop climbing. However, I think that the limit of a human being is only in his or her own mind, and we are the only judge of our own capabilities. That is why 1 month after coming out of the hospital, I was back in the mountains, in flippers though, with my toes bandaged. Mount Everest was my 6th expedition on which I had got this injury. I did 17 more after that in various countries, including Asia's highest volcano, Mount Damawand in Iran, as well as Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa. While I was in hospital, I also wrote down my Mount Everest journey in form of a manuscript. I sent this manuscript to more than 20 publishers at that time. Some did not reply at all, while some did reply in negative, citing various reasons. All these while, what did not diminish was my hope and faith in my own work. And now, today, after almost 10 years, when it was written for the first time, the same book is under publication from Delhi. After I retired from Indian Air Force in 2015, I sat down for 4 years to prepare for the toughest examination of our country, the civil services. The examination is conducted in 3 stages every year, and I was fortunate to make it to the last stage of the state civil services, igniting a hope in everybody that very soon I would be joining the most prestigious services of our nation. However, it was not to be, not yet perhaps, because I could not make it to the final list. But does life stop here? Though you can imagine the level of dejection I must have gone through, but does life stop here at this ebb? No. While I took a small break from my books, I poured out all my accumulated energy and emotions into reviving another of my passion, and that is public speaking. This was something which I had been postponing due to my studies, but now, in the form of an adversity, I got an opportunity. And till now, there have been 105 talks and interviews already delivered on various platforms such as TEDx, Toastmasters, Rotary Internationals, as well as Sustainable Development Leaders Council, an affiliated unit of United Nations Development Programme. Through these multifarious experiences of my life in defense forces, mountaineering, writing, as well as public speaking, I have realized one fundamental truth of life, that like a range of mountains, life also has various peaks and troughs. If the peaks have their own obvious charm, it is in the troughs, it is in the valleys that life is nurtured. If from the glaciers of high altitude emerge the rivers, it is in the valleys that their waters are utilized. Together, they make an entire thriving ecosystem. So, It is a mixture of hope and despair. It is a constant exchange between highs and lows. Therefore, if you are also, like me, oscillating between hope and despair, remember, it is we who decide where to stop. Remember that you are going through just the normal process of life and you are not alone in this. Next time, when it feels like the end of the world, when you are surrounded by darkness and nothing else, and the demons of despair attack you, do not stay buried in it. Take a bold step, light a matchstick, and start walking. You will find your candles along the way. The path of light, the path of hope will always win. Thank you. Jai Hind. Namaste.